My husband's family invited me to a family meeting, but I had no idea what was coming. They handed me a contract and said, "Sign this to give us all your savings." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, until they locked the door, but they didn't know I had my own plan that would make them regret everything. Let me start by saying I knew my husband's family was greedy, but I never expected this level of craziness. My husband, Walter, and I had been together for 10 years. We both worked hard, managed our money well, and kept our finances separate while equally sharing expenses. I had savings, investments, and my name was on everything we owned together. I thought we had a good system. His family, on the other hand, was a financial disaster. His parents, his older brother, his sister-in-law, and even a cousin, every one of them had money problems. They were drowning in debt, made bad investments, and borrowed money without paying it back. But Walter always told me we would keep our money separate from them. I believed him. Then came the so-called family meeting. Walter said his parents had an important announcement and wanted everyone there. I wasn't excited to go, but I agreed, expecting the usual drama, someone needing money or complaining about their debts. I never imagined what would actually happen. When we arrived, something felt strange. Everyone was already there, sitting in the living room, waiting. Walter and I sat down, and his dad, Richard, started talking in a serious tone. "We've been discussing something important," he said. His mom, Hannah, gave me a sweet but fake smile. "We know you've done well with your savings," she said. My stomach sank. I looked at Walter, but he wouldn't look back at me. Then his brother, Dan, pulled out a thick contract. "To make things fair," he said. He handed it to me like it was some kind of gift. I skimmed through it and felt my blood turn cold. They wanted me to transfer all my savings into a family account managed by Richard. Their excuse? Since I had saved money, it was only fair to share it with the whole family. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "You're kidding, right?" I said. "We're serious," Richard replied. Dan crossed his arms. "Family helps each other." I looked at Walter again, but he still wouldn't meet my eyes. "No way," I said, tossing the papers onto the table. "I'm not signing this." Richard sighed like he was disappointed. Then, calmly, he stood up and locked the front door. Hannah kept smiling and said, "We hoped you'd just sign, but if you need more time to think, that's fine too." Dan put the contract back in my lap. "Read it again, carefully." I looked around. Everyone was staring at me, waiting, and then it hit me. Walter knew. He wasn't surprised. He had known this was going to happen and never warned me. Something inside me snapped. Slowly, I reached into my purse. Their smug faces told me they thought I was grabbing a pen. Instead, I pulled out my own folder, calmly setting the papers on the table. Richard frowned. "What's this?" I leaned back. "Divorce papers." Walter's head shot up. "Wait, what?" I turned to him. "I always wondered why you insisted on keeping our finances separate. Now I know. Your family has always come first for you. But this?" I pointed at their contract. "This proves it." Walter's face turned red. "Babe, let's talk about this." "No." I pointed at the papers. "You're signing those today." Hannah's fake smile finally disappeared. "Now, hold on." "No, you hold on." I cut in. I came prepared. I turned back to Walter, my voice steady. "I met with my lawyer 2 weeks ago. The house? It's in my name. The car? Also mine. My savings? You were never on the account. You don't have access to a single penny." Richard's face turned purple. "You ungrateful little." "Careful," I warned. "I also have a restraining order ready in case anyone in this room tries to harass me." Silence. Then Dan scoffed. "You wouldn't actually go through with this?" I pulled out my phone. "Want me to call my lawyer right now?" Walter swallowed hard. "Please don't do this." I raised an eyebrow. "Why? So your family can drain me dry? So I can spend my life paying for their bad decisions?" I pointed at the contract. "You really thought I'd sign that?" Hannah started crying. Richard was shaking with anger. Dan looked like he wanted to punch something, but I didn't care. I was done. The room was tense. Walter's family sat frozen, staring at me like I had just pulled out a weapon instead of divorce papers. Finally, Walter spoke. "Babe, let's talk about this privately." I scoffed. "Oh, now you want privacy? You had no problem setting me up in front of everyone. You thought locking me in would scare me? No, we're doing this here, right now." Hannah wiped at her fake tears. "You don't understand, dear. Families share." I laughed bitterly. "Funny, in 10 years, no one here has shared anything with me, except their problems." Richard clenched his jaw. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back." I smirked. "Oh no, how will I ever survive?" Dan sneered. "You think you're smart, but Walter's not signing anything. He's not that stupid." I turned to Walter, who was staring at the divorce papers like they would burn him. "You will sign," I said, "because if you don't, you'll regret it." His eyes snapped to mine. "Are you threatening me?" I leaned in. No, Walter, I'm warning you. He swallowed, his hands shaking. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had more than just divorce papers. I pulled out another set of documents and placed them on top. Walter hesitated. What's this? I smiled coldly. Proof of your other little secrets. His face went pale. I turned to his family. Would you like to know how Walter has been stealing money from you for years? Richard sat forward. What are you talking about? I tapped the papers. Bank transfers, fake investments. Walter has been taking money from all of you. Walter jumped up. That's a lie. But I just sat back, watching the panic spread. I was done playing their game. Now, they could deal with the consequences. I crossed my arms. Is it because I have proof? If you really want to test me, I'll gladly take this to the police. Hannah gasped. Dan grabbed the papers, scanning them quickly, his face twisted in anger. No way. He wouldn't, but then he saw a specific transaction. His grip tightened. You bastard. Walter froze. Dan, I can explain. But Dan was already on his feet, fists clenched. You took my money, my kid's money, you said you were investing it for me. Wait, Richard growled, snatching the papers. His face darkened as he flipped through them. Is this why my business loan got denied? Because you emptied the emergency fund? Hannah burst into fresh tears. You told me you needed that money to help with the mortgage. Everything exploded. The whole family started yelling at Walter, furious. He tried to explain, but no one was listening. I just sat back, watching. I had known for a while that Walter was lying, not just to me, but to them too. His money transfers were suspicious. His excuses never added up. After digging around, I found out the truth. Walter had been stealing from his own family, and they had no idea, until now. As the shouting got louder, I stood up and grabbed my purse. Walter turned to me, desperate. You set me up. I tilted my head. Did I? Or did you do this to yourself? He lunged toward me, but Dan shoved him back so hard he almost fell. You're done, Dan snarled. We're pressing charges. Walter looked around, realizing he was completely alone. Mom, Dad, you can't do this to me. Hannah, still crying, shook her head. You did this to yourself, Walter. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Before stepping out, I glanced back at him one last time. Oh, and Walter, he looked up, panicked. I smiled. Consider this my contribution to the family. Then I walked out, leaving him to deal with the chaos alone. I felt lighter than I had in years, but I knew this wasn't over. Walter wouldn't give up that easily. I drove straight to my lawyer's office to officially file the divorce papers. The faster I cut ties, the better. But just as I pulled into the parking lot, my phone started buzzing. Hannah, we need to talk. Call me now. Dan, did you know about all of this? Richard, you're lawyering up? Really? You're making things worse. I ignored them. They weren't my problem anymore. But then, a message popped up from an unknown number. Unknown, you think you've won? My heart pounded. The number wasn't saved, but I knew exactly who it was. Walter. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer and went inside to finish what I started. For the next few weeks, Walter pretended everything was normal. He refused to move out, even though his name wasn't on the house. He tried to drain our joint account, but I had already taken my half. Worst of all, he spread lies, telling everyone I had set him up with fake documents, trying to ruin his life. His family wanted to believe him, at first, but then the investigation started. Dan wasn't bluffing when he said they'd press charges. When they went to the police, officers looked into Walter's accounts and found even more dirt. It turned out Walter wasn't just stealing from his family. He had secret bank accounts. He had taken out loans under his parents' names without them knowing. He had stolen Dan's identity for a credit card scam. And worst of all, he had been embezzling from his own father's business. Once that came out, his family completely turned on him. Richard was the first to act, suing Walter for every cent he stole. Dan followed, filing fraud charges. Hannah, who had defended Walter at first, finally snapped when she found out he had secretly taken a second mortgage on their house. Everything hit him at once. And me? I watched from the sidelines. I thought he'd finally accept defeat. I thought he'd disappear. I was wrong. One night, about a month later, I woke up to loud banging on my front door. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. A sick feeling crept into my stomach as I grabbed my phone. Then, I heard it. Open the door, I know you're in there. It was Walter. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just called the police. You set me up? He kept yelling. You took everything from me. Let me in. I stayed quiet, watching the security camera as red and blue lights flashed outside. The police arrived, and Walter tried to run, but he wasn't fast enough. They tackled him to the ground and arrested him. The next morning, I found out why he had come to my house like that. His family had completely cut him off. No money, no house, no car, And his legal problems? Worse than I had imagined. I thought that was the end of it, but a week later, my lawyer called, sounding amused. "You're going to love this," he said. "Walter had a secret bank account in your name." I almost dropped my coffee. "What?" "Turns out, he had been hiding stolen money in an account under your name, probably planning to blame you if he got caught. But he was sloppy and didn't cover his tracks. So guess what? Since the account is legally in your name, you get to keep every cent." Walter went straight to jail for fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. I walked away with a fat payout. The man who tried to steal everything from me? He ended up losing everything to me instead. Walter thought he could ruin me. He thought he could use me as his escape plan, dump all his crimes on me and walk away clean. But he destroyed himself instead. Once we found out about the secret account, my lawyer moved fast. Since it was in my name, I had the legal right to keep the money. Over $300,000. Money he stole from his family, from his father's business, from fake loans, all of it. His family tried to fight it in court. Dan, Richard, and Hannah all wanted the money back. It was ours, they argued. But my lawyer shut them down. "Your son committed fraud," he said. "You can press charges against him if you want, but my client had nothing to do with his crimes." They had no case. While Walter sat in jail, I walked away with everything he stole. His trial was a disaster. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Even his own lawyer looked embarrassed. The charges kept piling up: identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny. In the end, the judge had no mercy. Walter was sentenced to 7 years in prison, and because he had no money for a good lawyer, he didn't get sent to a low-security prison. Nope, he ended up in a rough state prison, with real criminals who didn't care about his excuses. The last time I saw him was in court. He looked terrible: messy hair, pale face, no confidence left. As I walked past him, he whispered, "Please, help me." I smiled. "You think I ruined your life?" I leaned in and whispered back, "You did this to yourself." Then I walked out without looking back. Oh, and the house he refused to leave? I sold it for a huge profit. The car he tried to take? Sold that too. I left with my money, my freedom, and my future intact. Walter left with nothing.